We continue in our discussion of the 5 points of TULIP: total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. And we are presently discussing the first of the 5 points, which is total depravity. We have pointed out that total depravity is an extremely practical doctrine, as it relates not only to every point of Christian doctrine, but it also relates to nearly every aspect of our everyday lives. Today we want to discuss yet another aspect of total depravity, and that is total depravity as it relates to the concept, the most important concept of what we call antithesis. What is antithesis? Antithesis, as defined by Wikipedia, is the juxtaposition of contrasting ideas, usually in a balanced way. The juxtaposition of contrasting ideas. It used to be true in the church among pastors who would get up and preach sermons that they would contrast in order to teach or inculcate some particular doctrine. They would contrast this doctrine with what it isn't. In other words, they had in their minds that a person only expresses what a certain concept is, and a certain concept is what it is only insofar as it is distinguished from what it isn't. Stated in another way, using the gospel as an example, the gospel only is the gospel as it is contrasted from what it isn't. Justification by faith, in other words, is only justification by faith as it is contrasted with the antithetical religion of justification by works. We contend that when we lose this concept of antithesis, and we've all but lost it in the church today, even yes among those who claim to be reformed, once you lose this concept of antithesis, you end up in a veritable sea of relativity, which is where we find ourselves. First of all, we want to point out antithesis in different aspects of thinking and different disciplines. And first of all, we want to point out that there is no science without antithesis. In science, we have light versus darkness, motion versus non-motion. Imagine trying to live your life not understanding the difference between stop and go. What an impossibility. In science, we have vertical, up versus down. We have horizontal, left versus right. There is not only is there no science without antithesis, but there is no math without antithesis. In math, we have positive versus negative numbers. I once had a seminary professor who made one of the most profound statements I've ever heard from anyone. And he said this with respect to math: the difference between 0 and 1 is greater than the difference between 1 and any other number, because the difference between 0 and 1 is the difference between nothing and something, whereas the difference between 1 and any other number is a difference in degree, which is to say the difference between 1 and any other number is the difference between something and yet another something. There is not only no science without antithesis, no math without antithesis, but there is no medicine. In the discipline of medicine, there's no medicine without antithesis. For in medicine, we have the concepts of life versus death. We have doctor versus patient. In the area of philosophy, there is no philosophy without antithesis or logic. There is a concept of logic known as the law of non-contradiction, which is A cannot equal non-A. There's no philosophy, there is no logic without the law or the concept of antithesis. In logic, we also have true as opposed to false, which leads us to something that we constantly hear in the church as a result of losing this idea of antithesis. We frequently hear this statement, and that is that Christianity is not a religion, but a relationship. Christianity, they say, constantly. Haven't you heard that? Christianity is not a religion. Well, these people simply do not read their Bibles, for in the book of James, Christianity is not only said to be a religion, but Christianity is stated to be, in other words, Christianity is said to be synonymous with religion. Christianity is equated with religion. James, we read from James 1:26, if any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. If any man among you seemeth to be a Christian, and bridleth not his tongue, this man's Christianity is vain. And so, yes, Christianity is not only a religion, it is the one true religion. Today we want to speak of what we consider the ultimate contrast, the ultimate antithesis, and that is what we believe to be the antithesis between total depravity and perfect righteousness. The antithesis between total depravity and perfect righteousness, and that would have to be Christ's perfect righteousness. And we believe this to be the ultimate antithesis, because once you lose this, you lose everything. Once you lose this, you have sold the farm, as it were. And we believe that we have indeed all but lost this. And the first example would be that those in the church today who even those who claim to be reformed, the leaders in the church today, for the most part, when they discuss the doctrine of total depravity, as we've said before, one of the first things they say, if not the first thing they say in their definition of and discussion of total depravity, is this: total depravity does not teach what it indeed does teach. Total depravity does not teach that the sinner is as bad as he can be. Whereas, historically, that is exactly what it has taught and does teach. Just for one example, taken from the Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 6, dealing with the fall of man, it says this: that man at the fall was made opposite to all good. I challenge any one of you out there in television land who claims to be reformed, please come up with a clearer expression that the sinner is every bit as bad as he can be. Clearer than this statement, that at the fall, man was made opposite to all good. Not opposite to some good, not inconsistent with all good, but made opposite to all good. And the problem of those who state unequivocally that total depravity does not teach us that the sinner is as bad as he can be, their problem is this: they are defining sin solely in terms of actions, whereas total depravity does not speak of actions, it speaks of nature. It does not speak of fruit, it speaks of root. But these men are leaving the sphere of total depravity and speaking of actual sins as opposed to original sin. This is totally unforgivable among those who should know better than this. Now, once we lose this concept of antithesis and what we consider the ultimate contrast, or the ultimate antithesis of total depravity as opposed to perfect righteousness, once we lose this, we lose everything in theology. We said that the 5 points of tulip, all, and it has been said throughout the entire history of the church. Orthodox theologians have all made this statement, that the 5 points of tulip all stand or fall together, which is to say that if you deny one of the 5 points, you cannot do so without denying all the other 4 points. And so we can expect that once we lose the contrast, once we lose the antithesis between total depravity and perfect righteousness, which we contend the church has lost, we lose the other 4 points as well. And that's what we want to contrast in this session, and we might have to have another session to point out just exactly what happens when we lose the concept of the antithesis between total depravity and perfect, unadulterated righteousness. But before we get into our next session explaining how this denial of total depravity affects every other doctrine of the 5 points of tulip, we want to point this contrast out, and that is that those who have, as we contend, redefined total depravity, they speak thusly. They say total depravity does not teach us the sinner is as bad as he can be, but it only teaches that every sinner has been affected, that the sinner has been affected in every area of his life by sin. Well, we contend that this and these people, to use yet another instance of antithesis, they cannot be right and they must be wrong. They must be wrong and they cannot be right. Because, number one, they must be wrong when they say that Christianity doesn't teach that the sinner is as bad as he can be. They must be wrong because there is no degree among those who are dead. There's not one dead person, because man is said to be dead in trespasses and sins. The unregenerate sinner is dead in trespasses and sins. Deadness does not admit of degree. Man is said in in John 3:19 and 20, this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world and men loved darkness rather than light. To love darkness rather than light is not to love darkness more than light. It is one as opposed to the other. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light. He loves the darkness and he hates the light. He loves the darkness rather than the light. This, my friends, is the concept of antithesis. And this is stating that the sinner is every bit as bad as he possibly can be, because total depravity speaks of nature, not of actions. All men are equally dead. Secondly, not only must they be wrong, but they cannot be right. For when they say that total depravity only teaches that every area of the sinner's life has been affected by sin, well, the Christian cannot be said to be totally depraved, because that is what we are saved from. We're saved from being at complete enmity against God. We're saved from being dead in trespasses and sins. We're saved from loving darkness rather than light. But according to their definition, to say that a man is totally depraved is to say that the sinner has merely been affected in every area by sin. But we must point out that every Christian, if he faces himself honestly, every Christian himself has been totally affected, has been affected in every area of his life by sin. And so these men in their redefinition of total depravity have lost the concept of antithesis, and therefore they must be wrong. Their definition must be wrong and cannot be right. We plan to continue the discussion and the idea that to deny the antithesis between total depravity and perfect righteousness is to affect every area of the 5 points of tulip. Amen.